Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today, where we will be discussing how Deltec Workbook can be utilized to help your company to avoid overservicing clients. Before we get started for today, just a quick agenda is after we get through this slide, through the agenda, I should say, I'm going to provide a brief introduction about PCI, explain what we are as a company and so on. Then I'll also provide an introduction to about myself. Then we'll talk about some of the key requirements that are needed to avoid overservicing, and then we will have a quick demo to see how Deltec Workbook can be that solution for you. A little bit about PCI. PCI stands for Premier Consulting Integration. We have we offer services for Deltec Workbook, so we implement Deltec Workbook to agencies and companies. We also offer support services for Workbook. So if you need help with managed accounting services or just generic admin services, support, and so on, we are here for you. PCI also will help integrate Workbook into another platform if needed. So for example, if you needed Workbook to connect to HubSpot or Salesforce or something along those lines, as long as those other platforms have an open API, we would be able to integrate it for you. We also offer a variety of other services, so if you do have any questions about those, please feel free to reach out to us. My name is Drew Stein, and I am a principal consultant here at PCI. And on a day-to-day basis, what I do is I work with agencies to implement the Deltec Workbook system as smoothly and as fastly as possible so you're able to improve your processes and get that return on the investment on Workbook. Before we get into the demo section of this webinar, I did want to just talk about Workbook. Workbook is an end-to-end ERP system and has everything from CRM to project management and accounting. And I say and accounting there because what you're able to do is get the profitability down to the project level. So not only do you get profitability at the company level, not only do you get profitability at the client level, but you can also get profitability at the project level, which is primarily what we'll be talking about today, since we'll be talking about how to avoid overservicing clients. Workbook also offers resource management functionality to make sure people are fully and optimally utilized. And then Workbook also has a finance and accounting system. So it's a fully function accounting. So, you have AP, AR, everything you think of that you would need to successfully run your company on the system. So Workbook, it could be a solution for you. And before we get into Workbook as a solution, we have to talk about what's needed in order to avoid overservicing. So in order to avoid overservicing, we need to make sure we have a clear project scope. Not only just a dollar value amount, so $50,000 to create a website, but what's included in that? How many bells and whistles do we work on this website? How many rounds of revisions and so on? So we have to make sure that's all included in the project scope. We also have to make sure there is a clear project and plan and good resourcing. And that's important because even though we might have, you get 3 revisions for this website banner, you get XYZ, that's all great. But unless we have a plan to achieve that, chances are we are going to be over-servicing client because we're not taking anything into account in terms of resourcing and planning and so on. So not only do we need to plan for internal resources to be used on these projects, but we also have to be able to utilize external resources. So for example, vendors or freelancers and so on. Another key part in order to avoid over-servicing clients is the ability to quickly compare budgets versus allocated. Those are the project plans and the actuals. It doesn't do us any good if we overservice a client and we only notice it a month later, right? We want to be able to see real-time data. How are we progressing on this project? How are we doing in terms of the budget? Are we starting to overservice? Where are we going over at? And so on. So we need to be able to see that real-time data to make the decisions to make sure our projects stay on track. We also have to make sure that we have standard KPIs. And this is important not just for over-servicing, but it would really help the company overall. So, as we're going through our daily or weekly stand-up meetings, maybe I'm project manager and I'm meeting with my director and so on, we want to be able to reference the key items that we're going to be utilized to see how we're progressing on those projects, right? Those key performance indicators. And that's actually where we're going to start. So here is an example of a dashboard within Workbook that could be utilized within your system and its project profitability. And there's metrics and dollars, amounts, and numbers on here and so on. But there's also this margin column, which is color coded. And it makes it super easy for a project manager, for example. I can see how my margins are progressing. So maybe I meet with a controller or a project finance manager, once a week, once a month, whatever it might be. And we can look at that and say, okay, yellow, I know yellow just means it's at risk, right? Green means we're doing great, our margins are great. Red means we're starting to overservice, our margins are decreasing, and so on. So there's that flexibility or that easiness of just being able to look at that. There's also something along the lines of this other dashboard that could be utilized, the client project profitability. This maybe would be used more or less by the finance team or by a director level. But what you're able to see is you're able to see revenues and margins, and you can see how it's trending, and then you can see the details down below. So as the data is being entered into Workbook, both of those would also be updating in real time. And that takes us into the live demo to show you how those dashboards would be created, or not be created, but how they obtain their values in those numbers and so on, so that your teams can make decisions. So with that said, I am going to be pulling up Workbook here. And what I'm showing is the projects list. And I'm currently signed in as a project manager because we're talking about how to stop overservicing clients and projects. And this specific project manager is responsible for Heineken. Underneath Heineken, I can see the 3 projects that I am responsible for. And then off to the right, I have the dollar value amounts associated with that. So I have the budget amount, that's my scopes. That's the dollar amount of the scopes. I have the actuals that are being incurred based off the project plan, the open purchase orders, and so on, vendor invoices, workbooks, and calculating the estimate to complete. We then also have the expected over under spend. And so what this is allowing me to do as a project manager is I can come here on a daily basis, see how my projects are progressing, and then I can also then dive deeper to see, okay, what can I do to bring my projects back on track? And we're going to take a look at that here in a second. But I just want to point out is there's also this graphical view down below. It's essentially the same metrics of above. Up above, it's based off dollar value amounts, and currently down below, I'm looking at it based off hours. So I have the budget of hours, hours incurred, expected future hours, and so on. But if I'd like to change that to, for example, the amounts, quickly change that, and you can see how it changed to the amounts, the dollar value amounts. And this goes back to what I was saying about how it's important to have standard KPIs to make sure when you have your meetings, everyone's referencing and talking about the same thing. And you can set these grids to be standardized. So everyone's looking at the same columns. In the background of the system, you can add more or remove different columns and so on. But this would be a best practice here, just have these 4 here metrics. So once again, this is kind of almost like an end result. But how does the budget get created? We've mentioned that the scope needs to be clear, what's included, and so on. So as you're going through and you're saying we're going to offer a website to Heineken, on the budget section of this, you'd want to go through and estimate the number of hours needed per level, for example. So lead developer for 40 hours. I have my hourly rates being pulled in from my rate cards, and it gives me my amounts off to the right here. Also, you can see we have purchases and so on that are included. So if you need to have an outside freelancer working and so on, that could be included also in the budget itself. Budgets, when you're creating a budget, I would recommend using templates to streamline the process, making sure you have the best in class or standardized budgets that your new project managers and so on could easily reference to help build up these. We also have the schedules because having a budget is great, but unless we know how we're going to achieve this website, and the resources that we're going to build out on this project plan, the budget doesn't make much sense or isn't really utilized because we have budget, but we don't have where we're going to achieve it. So this is where the schedule comes into play. And on the schedule, it's fairly detailed here in this example where I have analysis. And underneath analysis, I have several different tasks. On each task, I then can assign multiple different people. So for example, on this concept and prototypes, I can see both Brian and Don were assigned. And I can see the total number of hours were 19. And so far, only half hours used. I can then also dig deeper to say, okay, well, who used the half hour? I can see Brian did, and he wasn't even assigned. So I could ask Brian, like, why, what happened there? Like, why did you sign or enter time onto this task and you weren't assigned to it, right? I could follow up with Brian. There's also the ability to dig even deeper and a centralized view, and that would be this analysis module over on the left-hand side. When I click on the analysis module, what you're going to see is we are able to see the budget amount per level. We are able to see the scheduled sales value amount, which is coming from the project plan. And then we have the actuals incurred off to the right here. So I can see the time entries, and then I can see any purchases that have occurred, any purchase orders, and so on. All this information is going to help the project managers ensure that the projects are delivered on time and in scope and that we're not overservicing the clients. So just as a recap, in order to have a clear, or to stop overservicing clients, we need to have a clear scope. That's our budgets. We need to be able to have clear and good KPIs, which you can see here. We also have to be able to have real-time data, which all this is updating as soon as it's being entered into the system. And we also need to be making sure that we have good and accurate project plans, which is being created by our schedules. So if you do have any questions about workbook or about how PCI could assist your company, please feel free to reach out to me. My email is drew.stein@premierconsultingllc.com, or feel free to send an email to info@premierconsultingllc.com. Thank you for taking your time to watch this webinar today. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to reach out to us. Thank you and have a good day.